And I told Kat earlier, I mean, that's what, during COVID, that's what JR and I did. I mean, we just sat in our offices and recorded our sermons. So it wasn't any big deal. Well, it says that it's working, so we'll see. In his inauguration address in 1961, President John F. Kennedy issued a challenge to all Americans, something that I'm sure that you have heard. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It was a challenge that he wanted every citizen to consider. It not only applies to the country, it also applies to every group or community to which we belong. Ask not what your family can do for you, ask what you can do for your family, or your spouse, or your friends, or your neighborhood, or your church. It comes down to this. Ask not what others can do for you, ask what you can do for others. John F. Kennedy inspired a nation with that very simple challenge. And from what I've studied and read, I think in many ways, they stepped up to the plate. For example, there were thousands of young people who signed up for service in the Peace Corps after his address. And then came the 70s. You remember what the 70s were called? The me decade. Relegated to the back burner for a whole lot of folks were the ideas of service and sacrifice. Instead, and I'm speaking in broad generalities here, the cultural focus turned inward, as in, what's in it for me? What's best for me? What do I get out of this? Among the best-selling books of that decade was Looking Out for Number One. It was a self-help classic that sold millions. Probably shouldn't be surprising that in the decade of the 70s, it also launched Self Magazine. I imagine you can probably figure out what it is because of the title. And John Lennon sang, I don't believe in magic, I don't believe in I Ching, I don't believe in the Bible, I don't believe in Hitler, I don't believe in Jesus, I don't believe in Kennedy, I don't believe in Buddha, I don't believe in mantra, I don't believe in Gita, I don't believe in yoga, I don't believe in kings, I don't believe in Elvis, I don't believe in Zimmerman, I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me. The 70s were, in many ways, a celebration of self-indulgence and self-gratification, in which the mantra for a lot of folks was, if it feels good, do it. But we shouldn't be too hard on the 70s. It could be argued that every decade before and since has also been characterized by a me-centered mindset. In fact, a few years ago, Time magazine featured a cover story in which they called the millennials the me, me, me generation. And I would imagine there are quite a few millennials who would say, oh yeah? Look at Generation Z. They don't have anything on the rest of us. The fact is that being self-centered isn't new to this generation or any generation. Humans have always had a what's in it for me kind of mindset. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. So let's not blame the 70s or the baby boomers or the greed is good yuppies or the me, me, me millennials or anyone else. Self-serving, self-centeredness is just a part of the human sin condition. That's why when we become Christians, an amazing transformation begins to occur. We begin to see beyond ourselves, and we understand that sometimes, for the very first time, there is a God and I'm not Him. There's a center of the universe and it's not me. We begin to understand that life isn't only about accumulating all that I can for myself. There are millions and billions of people who share this planet with us, and they're all hurting. They're lost. They're helpless. They're full of despair, and they need our help. These people exist not only halfway around the world, but halfway around the block. Maybe even halfway across the room that we're in right now. Our challenge as believers is to look beyond the world of me into the world of those whom God has called us to serve. We're in a series of studies that I've called Getting Back to the Basics. In week 1, I talked about how the all-inclusive nature of the Christian life is not merely a sometimes hobby. It's a daily walk. In week 2, I talked about immersing ourselves in Scripture. We read it on a daily basis, and we need to think about it all throughout the day. Last week, I talked about immersing ourselves in prayer. We spend time in God's presence daily, and we keep the conversation going all day long. Tonight, I want to talk about immersing ourselves in service. An essential, basic, fundamental aspect of living the Christian life is that we serve one another. This is what Jesus taught us. In Mark 10, 43 and 44, he said, "But it must not be like that among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave to all." Jesus not only taught this with his words, he demonstrated it with his life. In the days before he died, he was alone with the disciples, and they had just finished a meal, and he did something completely unexpected. In John 13, verses 4 and 5, it says, "So he got up from supper, laid aside his robe, took a towel, tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin, began to wash his disciples' feet, and to dry them with a towel tied around him." The Gospel of Luke adds an additional little detail that John doesn't mention here. In Luke 22:24, it says, "A dispute arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest." Jesus' response was to show them what the greatest looks like. He washed their feet. This wasn't an act of a general or a commander or a king or even your average Joe. This is what servants were expected to do. The roads and pathways in those days were dirty and dusty or muddy if it had been raining. And when you arrived at your home or at the home of a friend, your feet would naturally be filthy. It was the servant's job to clean them before you entered the house. This is what Jesus did for his disciples. And then he said, in John 13, verses 12 and then 14 and 15, it says, "Do you understand what I have done for you? So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do just as I have done for you." We're called to serve one another. This is one of the basics of the Christian life. And this is something that anyone can do. And it echoes what Martin Luther King said. He said, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve." You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. The Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians 5:13, "For you were called to be free, brothers, only don't use this freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but serve one another through love." With all of this in mind, Today, I want us to consider 3 ways that we can develop the heart, mind, and attitude of a servant. Understanding that this is something that anyone can do. It's a command that anyone can obey. And it's a goal that's easily within everybody's grasp. So let's talk about how do you make your life all about serving others. Here are 3 guidelines to go by. Number 1, serve with a hands-on approach. We live in a day of what has been described as slacktivism. So what is slacktivism? It's the idea that liking a status on Facebook or sharing a link or retweeting something or expressing our righteous indignation in a strongly worded comment on Reddit means that we somehow have done our part. Slacktivism is the idea that having information or expressing an opinion or feeling some kind of an emotion about a topic is the same as being hands-on involved in the solution. And it's not. Now, I'm not saying that being informed or having an emotionally charged opinion are wrong. I am saying that this is not where it should end. Your feelings and deeply held values are a call to service, a call to get involved at a hands-on level. There are times when we all need to ask ourselves, other than expressing my opinion, what am I going to do about this? In any organization, including the church, spectators and critics and so-called experts are a dime a dozen. But a fully engaged, hands-on servant is beyond value. No doubt we've all had co-workers or team members who wanted to observe and supervise while everyone else did everything that needed to be done. Weren't they a joy to be around? Amazingly, this is not a new phenomenon. When Nehemiah organized the rebuilding of the wall in Jerusalem during the Babylonian captivity, he recruited families from every tribe to do their share, to work on a specific section of the wall. But there were some who thought that kind of work was beneath them. In Nehemiah 13:5, it says, "Beside them, the Tekoites made repairs, but their nobles did not lift a finger to help their supervisors." They just consider themselves too good for hard labor. They're like the celebrities who are famous for simply being famous, rather than those who make a name for themselves by doing great work or offering some kind of a significant contribution. When I talk about being hands-on, I'm talking about making the decision to be more than a mere consultant. I'm talking about getting your hands dirty, so to speak, with real work. I'm talking about serving with busy hands and active hands. There are 2 types of hands-on involvement that I want to encourage you to pursue. One is to serve in an organized ministry or outreach program. This is the kind of service that's planned, usually on a weekly or rotation kind of basis. Here at the church, that can include teaching Sunday school or helping in children's church. Maybe you're out there in the community helping to feed folks or going to make visits at the nursing home. There are a lot of organized, regularly scheduled programs that you can be a part of. They just need you. The other type of hands-on involvement is the spontaneous, spur-of-the-moment opportunities that present themselves throughout your week. Someone needs a ride? You say, I'll do it. A neighbor needs a babysitter? I'll do it. A friend is under the weather. I'll stop by and visit them. I'm the first one up this morning. Maybe I'll make breakfast for everyone. Life is full of unplanned opportunities to be a servant to those who are around you. Seize those opportunities if you possibly can. Developing a servant's heart involves a hands-on, hands-active approach. And here's the second guideline to go by in pursuing a life of service. Serve with a low profile. Now, there are some areas of ministry that are high profile. What I'm doing right now happens to be one of those kind of things. Other high profile areas of ministry include things in the music ministry, or teaching, or leading, or serving on certain committees. And those are all good things. But here's a good rule of thumb to follow. If your main area of ministry is high profile, high recognition, look for additional opportunities to serve that are lower in profile, that come with no accolades or recognition. Unlike the nobles of Tekoa, look for opportunities to serve in an area that some might consider beneath them. Chuck Smith was the former pastor of Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, California. He was a central figure in the Jesus movement. And from what I've read, he was a great leader. He went to be with the Lord in 2013. But I heard a story about him that when he hired a new staff member at the church to serve in the youth ministry or on the worship team or as one of the associate pastors, their job responsibilities included sweeping and mopping and scrubbing bathrooms. He didn't want ego to get in the way of a person's ability to minister and to serve. I personally think that it's important for a pastor or a minister to have a servant's heart. I heard another pastor of a good-sized church that had a school, K through 12 school at it, so you can imagine that it was a pretty good-sized church. His high-profile responsibilities included preaching and teaching, administration, leading the large staff. But for the last 8 years, he's also been on playground detail. Every week, he spends several afternoons watching elementary-age students during recess, helping them on the monkey bars, making sure that they're safe going down the slide, tying shoes, taking care of skinned knees, wiping noses, and picking up trash. There's nothing at all glamorous about it at all, but it's part of being a servant. The fact is that many times your most meaningful opportunities to serve are going to come with no recognition whatsoever. Jesus said in Matthew 6:34, "But when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Now that obviously applies to giving financially, but I believe that it also applies to any act of service or act of kindness that you extend to another person. It doesn't need to turn into some kind of a photo op or be fashioned into a press release. Just do good when you can, quietly and under the radar, and let God take care of what happens next. God wants us to serve one another in a low-profile, under-the-radar manner, even doing so anonymously whenever we can. Our purpose in giving, our purpose in helping, our purpose in serving is to bless and benefit others, not to score points or build up our resume. if there's any reward or recognition to be given, God will take care of it, because there's nothing that gets by him. He sees what you do. He also sees what you don't do. He's the one to whom you're accountable. God will use us, will use all of us in some kind of high-profile ministry at some point. And at the same time, we need to seek out those low-profile, low-recognition opportunities to serve. And here's the third guideline for pursuing a life of service. Serve with no strings attached. Many years ago, when I worked for the Wichita Park Board, I was driving home, and I drove past a church, and out front there was a whole bunch of youth that were holding up signs that said, "Free car wash." And I thought to myself, yeah, I just got paid that day. It was a Friday. And I thought, yeah, I can help them out. And so I pulled around, turned around, and came back and pulled into the parking lot, and they directed me to the line of cars. And I asked one of the kids, "What are you raising money for?" And he said, "We're not raising money. There's no charge. We're just washing cars as a service to the community." Now, I'd seen the sign that they were holding up, but apparently I didn't fully understand what free actually meant. As it turns out, it really was. There was no cost. There were people in cars ahead of me that tried handing money to youth, to the kids, and they wouldn't take it. It was no strings attached. And it wasn't a bad car wash. I left that day thinking, what a great message to send to the community, and what a great lesson to teach to these youth. They were here to serve, no strings attached. There are a lot of people who want to help others, but they want to help like the Godfather helped people. Okay, I'm not going to do a Godfather impersonation here. But he said, "I'll do this service for you someday, and that day may never come. I will call upon you to do a service for me." And that's the attitude that a lot of folks have. Jesus suggested a different approach. In Luke 14, verses 12 through 14, he said, "When you give a lunch or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors, because they might invite you back, and you would be repaid. On the contrary, when you host a banquet, invite those who are poor, maimed, lame, or blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Now, he's certainly not saying that you can never have friends over for lunch. That's not what he's saying. But he is saying, in effect, look for opportunities to serve others in a no strings attached, no quid pro quo kind of manner. You might say it this way: do for others what they cannot do for themselves, and expect nothing in return. Whenever a natural disaster strikes here in the United States, one of the first groups to get there is the Baptist Disaster Relief Ministry. There are other denominational and Christian ministries that also show up. And most of those happen usually within the first couple of hours. Also, among the first to show up are the media. They're there for a very short time to show the world the pictures of the devastation, and then they simply move on to the next story. The camera crews leave, but the relief workers are still there and will be there for quite some time, all without cameras showing all the lives that they're impacting through their ministries. And they do it all without expecting anything in return, because the people they're helping have lost it all. They have nothing that they can give. They have nothing that they can repay for the help that they're getting. Albert Schweitzer was a brilliant man. He was a musician, a physician, a theologian, and a philosopher. And he also spent much of his life as a missionary in Africa. This was his advice: do something for somebody every day for which you do not get paid. Pretty good advice. That's the essence of the no strings attached, no quid pro quo service. I got nothing to gain from this, and I'm not looking for some kind of an edge. I just want to help. I just want you to be blessed. When Dawn and I were doing apartment ministry in Topeka, once a year or so we would have a meeting at the apartments for the residents that live in the apartment community. And it was just an informational thing, just to ask them if there was anything that they wanted done that they didn't think that we were doing. The main thing we did was after school care. I mean, we did a latchkey kid program there at the apartments, but there were a lot of other things that we did. And notoriously, every time we did one, every time we had one of these meetings, somebody, a member, a resident, would say to us, you know, it's nice what you're doing. I'm just waiting for the other shoe to fall. I said, what do you mean? What's in it for you? At some point, you're going to say, this is what I want. And I would say to him every time, that's not the case. We're just here to help. That's all we want to do. But people today are jaded, and they think, when's the other shoe going to fall? When's Don Corleone going to show up at my door? The Apostle Peter summed it up this way in 1 Peter 4:10. Each of you has been blessed with one of God's many wonderful gifts to be used in the service of others. So use your gift well. God has given all of us, in various measures, the resources of time and skill and discretionary income, as well as at least one spiritual gift. And the purpose of these gifts is not to use them to accumulate more for ourselves, but to minister to those around us. This is a basic, fundamental element of the Christian life. We will never outgrow the need to serve one another. That means that we have to move beyond the me way of thinking, beyond a self-serving way of life. The challenge we must consider then is this: ask not what others can do for you, ask what you can do for others. That's a question that we have to ask, that we need to ask in every encounter we have. Let's do what we can, taking a hands-on, hands-active approach. And when possible, do it in a low profile, under the radar setting. And at every opportunity, with no strings attached, no quid pro quo kind of expectation. Throughout this series, I've saved the key verse for the end of the message. And I thought, yeah, why not do it for this one too? Why change at this point? Jesus told a story about the final judgment when the righteous would be invited to enter God's kingdom. He said this in Matthew 25, verses 35 through 40. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or without clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And this was his answer. And the king will answer them, I assure you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. That was the twist. What you do for others, you do for Christ. Let's not lose sight of the fact that every encounter we have is a divine encounter. Every person you meet, every person you come across, God knew you were going to come across them. It is a divine encounter. That means that every act of service, every act of kindness that you extend to somebody else, you extend to Jesus Christ himself. Those are his words, not mine. Sometimes I hear people say, I want to dedicate my life to serving God. Well, here's how you do it. You serve others. Because in serving others, you are serving God. Therefore, let's do all that we can to make every act of service that we do, every person we come across, we make it an act of service. And in doing that, we are serving our God. Ask not what others can do for you. Ask what you can do for others. Take out your prayer sheets, if you would.